Uh, so, we had a conversation on our email list several weeks ago when someone said that they wanted to know more about sky conditions for beginning observers. So, we put this together, Mike and I, to help people understand what the sky conditions that concern us are and how you can judge them and how you can decide whether it's a good night to observe certain types of things. And so with that, we'll list the three main categories. The main categories are how dark it is, and the seeing, meaning the steadiness of the atmosphere, and the transparency of the atmosphere. All those things can work against you or for you. So anybody here probably is aware that if you walk outside here and look up, the skies are more affected than they would be out in the country. And that's the light pollution problem that we have. There are several ways for you to measure darkness or judge it, and we'll go over that in a moment. The seeing or the steadiness, I think most people would understand if you said the steadiness of the sky. But astronomers often call it seeing, which is kind of mysterious. But when you look up in the sky, have you ever noticed that stars are twinkling? And you may have noticed that they're not twinkling as much directly overhead as they are low on the horizon. So that's this seeing aspect of the sky conditions. The transparency is something that I think a lot of people don't pay attention to. It's not exactly darkness. It's stuff in the air. So we have lots of stuff that can be in the air. It can be little particles of things, like pollen. You know, in the spring when you look and you can see the pollen blowing down the street. There's that week in April that's just awesome. There can also be wildfire smoke when they have the big fires out west. Sometimes there's so much smoke that it comes our way and we can tell that our skies aren't as clear. And then the big one for us in the southeast is the humidity. So it took me a while to learn about this humidity thing. Obviously, there's haze in the sky in the summer. We've all seen it. And not so much so in the winter. And the reason that is that there's more humidity in our air in the summer, and the sulfur dioxide, where's my chemist in the family here? Is it sulfur dioxide?
Yes.
Yeah. Blows from the coal power plants into our air. And it mixes with the humidity in the air, and that becomes a little bit translucent. So that is why the humidity is worse in the summer for us than it is in the winter. So anyway, all of these particles and aerosols that are in the air cause the light from outer space, passes through this, and these aerosols and particulates, they can either scatter light or absorb light. And what that really means is the photons of light coming to us are being eaten. So things look less bright to us. And you can calculate this effect, but it's a tricky calculation. And so I would say it's an indication rather than an absolute measure, but we'll get there. So anyway, those are the three main categories. The darkness, which is real easy for you to understand. The seeing, which you may not have realized, and then the transparency, which is probably the least talked about. So, if you go out into the country and you look up, and this was super obvious to us. We went out west. We were on the North Rim of the Grand Canyon. Boy, howdy, was it dark. It was so dark that we could see so many stars that we got lost. There was more stuff showing than we were used to seeing. So it was kind of confusing. But when it's a really dark sky, the advantage you gain is that the background sky is darker, and therefore you're able to detect more contrast between a faint fuzzy and the dark sky. If you look at that same faint fuzzy in a light polluted place, like outside the door here, there's not enough contrast between the faint object and the sky lighted up. Lit up? Yucky. How about yucky? And so you can't, there's not enough contrast difference, and you can't tell what you're seeing. So you definitely want to go to a darker place.
And I would add also, if it's so bright, you'll never, ever be able to overcome. Because if you think about what the telescope is doing, it's not really about magnification, it's light collection. And if there's no contrast to exploit between the object and the background sky, it's invisible completely, forever.
Not going to see it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how big your scope is, never going to see it.
That's true, and you make a super valid point. When we talk about telescopes, we did a public observing a week ago.
Yep.
And, it's so common to have a question like, well, how far can that see? Or how powerful is that telescope? And that is not the crucial question for telescopes. The crucial question is how much light it can gather for your eye. Because the more light you can gather for your eye, the better you're going to distinguish that contrast difference between the background sky and the faint fuzzy thing. It's like, if you're in the desert and you're really thirsty, do you want to catch that little rain cloud that comes over with a little cup or with a giant tub? You collect more with a tub, so that's the one you want. In our game, astronomy, the bigger your telescope, the more photons you can collect and send to your eyeball. So it's more about light collection than about magnification. All right, so seeing. The seeing, or lack of good steadiness, affects your ability to detect fine detail in something. So it turns out things like the planets and the moon are rather bright. So the darkness question becomes less of an issue. But the seeing becomes a greater issue because you want it to be very steady so that you can see the fine detail. And your slide is coming soon. There's a great slide he put in to help you understand what I mean about this seeing. But if you think about it, you wanted to look at Jupiter last weekend, which we did. And there was some twinkling and some poor seeing. But every little while, there was a moment of good, crisp seeing. And you have to train yourself to look for that, especially where we live, because our seeing can be kind of not so great. I think you added a slide about, yeah, we'll get there. So the seeing is more of a problem with planets, the moon, double stars, which are stars that are probably close together. And you have to be able to resolve the difference to see that they are separate stars. So that requires detail. And some deep sky objects we like to look at high magnification to see little bitty detail. But again, if you're looking for detail, seeing is what you need. You need good seeing. And the transparency really affects both the faint fuzzies, and it can affect the detail items. Because have you ever been out to look when there was a lot of pollen in here? It definitely affects any kind of thing that you look at, the faint fuzzies or the small detail items. So transparency, unless the transparency is extremely poor, I would say that it affects your observing less than the seeing in the darkness do. But it's a consideration. Okay, so some of us in here will look at anything, anytime, always. So you're not worried about what you're more interested in. Some of us are more interested in planets. Some of us look at the moon. What it is you're interested in looking at really determines which type of sky condition is the more important factor for you. So we covered that the darkness is super important for the faint fuzzies, and steady seeing is super important for detail, planets and moon and such. I say planets and moon. We have some sun photographers in here, and for them to do the fabulous work they're doing, it requires good seeing, because that too is highly detailed. So depending on what you want to see, depends on which condition you're looking for. Now some of us will look at anything, any night. If I have a fabulous night for seeing, I will look at some of the smaller things that I don't look at as often, planets and such. And as far as the darkness goes, I don't go in my front yard to look at dim galaxies. It's just too bright. So I know I have to go out in the country someplace to do that. So it helps you decide what you're going to do, or maybe what you just can't do, if that makes sense. It turns out that there are several ways to measure the three different categories. And there are several web resources. We'll show links to those at the end. There are pieces of equipment that can help you. So we'll kind of sort through some of that. And the key thing is for you to decide how you're going to judge these conditions and get good at it and stick with it. Because some of them require expensive equipment. You might not want to do that. You might want to just learn how others measure that type of thing.
Yeah, sometimes a good finger in the air.
Absolutely. But as long as you know what you were talking about when you wrote down it was a 7 out of 10, I don't have a clue what that means, but if you do and you stick with it, that's good.
Or if you want to, I mean, the website's great. And, some of them are really good.
Yeah.
So,
But those will give you a forecast.
Right.
It won't necessarily tell you what you actually experienced, but yeah, the forecasts
Right.
But if you just want to, you don't want an exact science.
Yeah.
kind of thing,
Absolutely.
That's true. Most of the ways to measure the darkness of your sky have got to do with you judging what it is. The first item, the Borel Scale, maybe you've heard of this, is very popular in America for people to talk about using the Borel Scale. There was an article written in Sky and Telescope in 2001 where John Borel wrote about how he had observed for years and come up with this scale of how dark his skies were. So we'll show at the end a link that describes his scale, and you can get really good at looking at the sky and assessing which level of his scale applies. Now this is somewhat subjective, and it could be that your skills are not equal to my skills. So whatever you say is a 2 may not be a 2 to me. So this is what I mean when I say you need to learn one of these techniques and stick with it. And if it's a subjective thing, like the Borel scale, it may not match another person's assessment. Just keep that in mind. This becomes important when you start logging your observations. You really want to write down what was the darkness, what was the seeing. You really want to keep track of that. And it's not as much for me to read your observations and understand exactly what you were seeing as it is for you to remind yourself, because you're the one that knows what a Borel 2 means to you. And as you gain experience in observing, your skills will change and you may see things differently.
And I'll say, doing it the manual way, I came across a lot of guides online that says, if you can see this,
Yeah.
but not this, you're most likely in Borel 3 skies. If you can make out, M33 naked eye, you're in this, but So, and that is important because, as Phyllis said, as you're taking notes or recalling what you were seeing, that is going to impact obviously the amount of detail and what potentially you could have seen. Oh, was that a supernova I saw? Yeah, no way if it was this, transparency was that bad or the skies were this bright.
True. So we'll have more information about the Borel scale at the end of the slides. Another way that people have used for zillions of years is the naked eye limiting magnitude. So if you've heard people say, well, these are magnitude 6 skies or magnitude 5.5 skies, this is what they mean. They figured out how dim a star is, the dimmest one they can see, looking straight up, not at the horizon, not towards the light dome of Raleigh, but straight up. And if you can estimate the magnitude of the star, the dimmest one you can see, then you have a naked eye limiting magnitude. So I worry that you can't see this, but you can practice this by playing the globeatnight.org. They have, the Globe at Night is a program for observers. It's worldwide. You can contribute your observations to them, and they keep it in their database, and they'll show a map and so forth, and sift through the data. So the next one begins on the 22nd. They obviously don't run the Globe at Night game, I like to call it, during full moon. So it's not online taking data tonight. But I think on the 22nd to the 29th, I want to say it's something like that. Then you can go outside, and Mark and I have done this. We go outside, we let our eyes darken out a little bit, and we look up to see what is the dimmest star and compare it to the charts that they provide. And it turns out that I can regularly do a few tenths dimmer than he can. So your personal equation here is important. But I would, this is a citizen science project. Anybody can do it. If you're a teacher, good gracious, you can get your students to do this. It costs nothing. All the materials are provided. So if you want to look into it, it's called globeatnight.org. Give you practice at assessing the dimmest star that you can see. And I guess the last one I have here is using an instrument to measure. So it turns out that Mike has experience with the iPhone app that does this, and I happen to have the light meter that does this. You want to tell about
No, go
that?
ahead. You start. I was
All right.
trying out for reference.
Some of you may have heard about a sky quality meter. The club owns one. I don't know who has it at the moment.
Doug?
Yeah. The model he has a push button, like in the picture. Let's see if I can do this. In the picture, it has a button, and it'll show a reading on the front. And you'll have to learn what these readings are really telling you. Like, this photo shows a reading of 19.66. Well, that's not great, but it ain't bad. It's better than my front yard. But you don't kind of know what 19.66 means, so you need to get a little bit familiar. And we often take the club's sky quality meter to star parties or new observing sites and assess how dark it is. This guy can connect to my computer, so I can set it up to run during the night. And you can watch the graph of how bright things are, and you can see it getting darker and darker towards midnight because people begin to turn on their lights. So there's a couple of ways. That way's not so expensive.
Yeah, a few bucks on the App Store. I believe the software developer only makes this for iPhones. Their rationale is Apple is very prescriptive of the types of cameras they use versus Android uses a gamut of cameras. So to try and have it calibrated to all possible cameras is too much. but it's pretty simple. The first option is dark. You put it down or in your pocket, you push the dark button and you kind of let it read. Supposedly reads absolute darkness. And then hold it straight up and click to measure the sky, and it will attempt to measure the sky. It is definitely an order or two less sensitive than a purpose-built unit, but what I use it for is at least consistency across. So I'll always be brighter. I won't get as good readings as one of these purpose-built meters, but at least I know compared to this location versus that location using this phone, I know the difference between them. The one thing it does do is it does provide not only the SQM number, which is that 19.66, it then also gives some other information, which I'm sure some of the logging software will also convert that into other things. So,
like the naked eye limiting magnitude, you can, if you're kind of used to working in those magnitudes, and you understand what a 6th magnitude sky is like, or 6.2, or these magic numbers, you can correlate the bigger number, the different number that's shown on the sky quality meter. That measurement is magnitude per square arc second. So what that does is it reads the brightness across a square arc second of sky and integrates it into a number. Whereas the naked eye limiting magnitude, it's the magnitude per arc minute. It's a different measurement. I don't know of any hardware that produces a naked eye limiting magnitude itself.
yeah, I don't think so.
But hardware will make a magnitude per square arc second measurement, and you can convert that. It's not the same as native hardware, but that's what we have. And then, of course, for years, okay, how many of you have been logging in the darknesses of 5 out of 5 or whatever? Whatever measurement that makes sense to you. Just be aware that it won't make any sense to other people. But that's the spitball method. Technically none. Okay, so that's darkness. Any questions? Yes?
So besides location, what variables go into the darkness? Like if you go to the same place, how does the darkness vary? And
What things can affect it?
Yeah.
Well, there's that great light polluter in the sky called the moon.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one. So if you look at your calendar and you know that the moon is full tonight, you're going to have some light pollution big time. That's why so many of us aim for those dark new moon weekends to go out and look at faint fuzzies. So the moon is one. I've noticed that when the state fair is in town, that the sky is much brighter, and it's all that dust that's kicked up and being lit up by all the fair lights.
Yeah.
It's terrible. So, if you set up beside a gas station with all the canopy lights, if the light can be seen by your eye where you are, it's not a good thing.
But then I'd say also snow cover.
Oh yeah.
Not that we have a lot to worry about that, but you are getting it. But yeah.
Near a lake.
Yeah. And then
Things I noticed in my neighborhood is about 1 o'clock in the morning, it gets a lot darker because people have their porch light timers set to shut off at 12 or 1, and you can notice the difference.
You really can.
you can absolutely see that at Big Woods. It's like the witching hour about 12:30, and it gets noticeably darker.
Well,
I'd
the
say-
steam settles down
Yeah.
about that time too.
And
because of
then-
temperature.
But there also is a correlation if you are in light polluted skies and you have some factors impacting transparency, you might get worse light
Yeah.
pollution as well. So it's not really causing the light pollution, it's amplifying it.
Because the
Because-
particles in the air are reflecting that light.
Yeah.
The particles, I guess, reflect, and the aerosols absorb. Is that right? Where's my chemist? Matt. Is that about right?
Humidity is off.
Yeah,
Right.
humidity is
Yeah.
terrible.
Right. Okay. So we're done with that one, I
I
think.
think we have one on the Borel, the darkness. One more slide. Yeah.
That's a great slide. It tries to correlate all these measurement methods.
Yeah, so we've got limiting magnitude across the top, and we've got the SQM readings, or I call them SQM, but it's the magnitude per arc second measurement, and then kind of Borel scale. So, but, you know, you can obviously see this was a manufactured picture that someone took to try to show the difference. It's all one picture that they've tried to put different levels of, I guess, opacity, if that's the right word, to try and show what's going on. But I just like the way this really kind of crystallized the idea of darkness.
Hey, Mike, where does Stone River fall based on?
I believe Staunton River is a 4, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I've only been as dark as 3, unfortunately. But even that, Phyllis, to your point, going out there the first time, I was so lost. I could not make sense of the constellations. I couldn't find the constellations. There were too many stars. At one point, I actually considered taking my red flashlight and shining it into my eyes. So it would blind me a little bit, so I couldn't see all the stars and I could get my bearings. But
Hal Woods used to be a 3,
yeah.
and then went to a 4. Pettigrew State Park hovers between 2 and 3.
Yeah, Pettigrew, yes.
Dalton Park
Yeah.
used to be a 2, it's a 3 now.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I've been in Borel one, middle of the desert in Saudi Arabia, but
Yeah.
I have no telescope with me. A little bit of roughness there.
But you had a howitzer.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think I really like this particular picture.
That's a great slide.
It
It
crystallizes a lot.
allows you to correlate the 3 together.
So I've also heard it referred to as like red, yellow, Borel sites. That's
Yeah.
the concept
Yeah.
there.
A lot of the light pollution maps will try and use a very similar scheme. And you know, it's give or take a little bit, you know.
There's a guy in Italy who did the light pollution atlas of the world or
Yeah.
something like that. He used some different colors. So.
But for reference, Big Woods now, most recently, unfortunately.
Bummer. But you know, we'll get a cold, crisp,
Crisp,
transparent
and-
night in winter.
And you can easily get down to a 5 again. But
As long as the power breaker at Sharon Harris would get down to 2 or 1.
Yes, we have a hurricane.
yeah.
Or Durham, let a hurricane come through.
I would say one thing, for those that are using this magnitude for square arc second measurement, I have found that it's going to be a number, say, between 18 and 22, somewhere in there. I have found that I can see with my telescope two magnitudes larger than whatever my sky quality meter says. So if I see 18.5 on my sky quality meter, I may be able to see as deeply as 20.5. But that's a surface brightness calculation. I guess we're not there yet. Maybe we'll get to that, maybe we won't. The bottom line is you can see dimmer things. In other words, if my sky is like this, 5.6 to 6.0, you're going to be able to see things that are dimmer than 6th magnitude. So don't take that as a floor. It's a judge of the contrast in the sky. Your eyeball is able to adapt to some extent to pick up more contrast. That's a whole subject, for another day. Okay, this is your
So I think this was the one we were talking about, the seeing, and it really is a measure of atmospheric turbulence, really. And it wasn't until I started thinking about a nice, flat, crystal clear pond, and the times you can see perfectly through that. You get some waviness on it, or someone throws a rock in it in the pool, and now it ripples. And you've got all that light now bending and moving around. So, what used to be perfectly steady, you could see right through it, you can no longer get that crystal clear piece. As Phyllis mentioned, it is usually measured in arc seconds. And again, it wasn't until I fully appreciated how it was measured. And if you think about a particular square, maybe if you were thinking about taking a picture, and you're looking at that star, and all of a sudden that star might jump from here to here, back and forth, because it's twinkling. So its absolute, center, will kind of jump around, or the amount of brightness that it has will jump around. And when you start thinking about that across an entire object, you can't get that nice pinpoint view. It's the image is kind of just oscillating. So that definitely.
One way to see that, Mike, is to defocus the star. So you've got a big blob, and you'll
Yep.
see the twinkling and the shimmering all over the disk.
Yeah. So
It's real pronounced.
absolutely.
I mean, you can see the effect during the day if you look down a hot road.
Oh yeah.
You see that shimmer, that's the same thing.
Yeah. It's literally just the light rays. And when we think about that in terms of the photons coming down through our atmosphere, if it's coming down and the atmosphere is nice and steady, those light waves or those photons will remain nice and flat and parallel. Once you hit that turbulent layer of atmosphere, all bets are off. But what's funny is, as Phyllis mentioned, this will start and stop, and you can have moments or seconds of really clear steadiness. In fact, I think the first time I started to experience that, looking at Jupiter in my first telescope, like, okay, wait, something's wrong with my eyes. It's like there must be something wrong with my eyes. But no, it's actually the conditions were changing, right before me in my eyepiece.
That happened last week at Prairie Ridge. Jupiter was pulsating.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It
It was lower in the sky too.
yes.
So you're looking through a lot more atmosphere. If you think about it, our atmosphere is a sphere around Earth. So if you're looking straight up, you're looking through the least amount of air. If you look down towards the horizon, the further toward the horizon you get, the more stuff you're looking through. So a lot of times you'll see more twinkling down low in the sky and not so much straight up.
Not only more atmosphere, but more of the thickest part of the atmosphere.
That was my question, is I've heard people say that the first 30 to 50 feet, I think Mark, you were the one that's told me this, the first 30 to 50 feet has more effect on seeing than, so if you get higher in altitude, if you could get up 7,000, 8,000 feet,
Yeah.
then you exclude a tremendous amount of the seeing issue.
Yeah.
Not that we can do that on the East Coast, but
And then lastly, there is a point exactly to your point about trying to get higher. Oftentimes, higher you get, if you're at the very top, you're not going to have that kind of turbulent air that's caused by air coming down off the mountains. So when you get air coming down off a mountain, or where your topography is not flat, that also worsens sky.
well, I mean, that's the big woods. You're sitting next to the lake, and you get a light breeze, and that warm, moist water comes off,
Yep.
or air comes off the water, and it comes over top of it, and you can see it in the
Oh, yeah.
eyepiece. It just falls apart. And that happens.
There was one time when a number of years ago, there was one of the club members who just finished his 8-inch telescope, Newtonian. They were looking at the moon, and it was not too low, it was pretty low. And he wasn't too happy with it, and he wanted me to take a look at it. I looked at it, and there's this nearly-looking moon. See quite a bit of detail on it. But then one of the things you can do with a fairly large telescope, and 8-inch is pretty good size, is try and focus on your turbulence layer. And I brought it in a little bit, it's a little bit close, but it's a fairly thin layer. All of a sudden, bang, here comes all this super sharp boiling detail. And I said it's going to be a long time before you get a night that will match this telescope. Because that detail was spectacular on the turbulence. But you can actually see this sometimes on a thin layer of turbulence. If you got several layers of turbulence, forget it.
I was constantly having to adjust my focus for the viewers
Yeah.
You know, just to try to keep him ahead of that seam.
Yeah.
Pulsation.
Just the way it is. Okay. So these are my measurement scales that I've learned about. The first one is a 5-point scale. And if you look online, you'll see good descriptions of the 5 different levels. But here again, you're subjected to the personal equation. So what you think is a super steady sky may not be super steady to another person. Now that's the Antoniadi scale. It is in real wide use. The next one, here it is. Can y'all see that laser? Or is it bouncing off?
See if I am here.
Okay. The Pickering scale. This is a 10-point scale, so even finer gradations. The cool thing about the Pickering scale is there's a photographer in Britain who has put up a web page that shows you each of the 10 scales with a little graphic. And I find that to be immensely helpful. But I think 10 grades is too many. So I think a lot of the Europeans use the Pickering scale. And it seems like everybody else uses Antoniadi. But anyway, choose one and stick with it. The Pickering scale, we have a resource at the end of the talk that will give you more information about exactly what each scale level means. The one I learned about first was this measurement in arc seconds. So the way that went was maybe I would look directly up at high power at the trapezium in the Orion Nebula. So that's like 6 stars. They're very close together. And however many I could see, and I knew how far apart they were, then I knew what my resolution would be for that night. And I know you photographers do this too. I've seen, one of you can help me, but I've seen you use your focusing feature in your photography software, and it'll show how much light is falling on how many pixels. And what you really want to do is you don't want this, you want this. And then you can measure how many arc seconds across the star is. So you obviously you want that to be the sharpest you can get, and then you can measure how far across that is, and then you know what the seeing is.
Full width half max.
Right.
It's a V curve, you want to be bottom.
Yeah. So he said, and this is correct, it's called a full width half max. Only photographers could come up with this wonderful term. But you'll see it abbreviated FWHM. That's what that means. They've looked at the graph. They know how many pixels are being illuminated by the light, which really means how good and tight the focus is on some star.
I mean, that was the focusing metric for years.
Yeah.
And I think it's changed a little bit with
You know, for
higher
me,
density pixels.
for me being a visual person though, I tend to look at certain ones in the sky, and if I can separate them that night, then I know, gee whiz, I'm able to separate 1 arc second. That's pretty good for around here. The imagers wouldn't like it, but, well, whatever. And then there's the spitball method, where you brew your own measurements. Again, this is meaningful to you if you're consistent, and if you try to share it with someone else, they have no clue what you're talking about. So you need to learn something and stick with it. If you use one of the more used scales, it can help.
If the seam was over an arc second and a half,
It didn't.
I had fuzzy balls for stars.
Yeah.
I mean, it ruins everything. So it is very important.
But the human eye
Right.
can make more adjustments than
Exactly.
the
The
CCD
camera
sensor.
can. Right.
So if you watch Jupiter and you wait for that
Well,
instant.
the camera collects over
True,
a period of time,
true.
and it smears the results over
Right.
the entire
Right.
size. So if you've got 2 arc seconds, then you're going to have a 2 arc seconds.
You're gonna have
Yeah.
lots
No matter
of
how
stars.
small it is.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Moving right along.
I love this one.
Oh, it's working, yay.
Trying to.
So we talked about the Pickering scale. These are some examples off this guy's webpage. You know, I would prefer the image on the far left, because the one on the far right looks more like what I see sometimes, especially when my telescope is warm
Yeah.
and cooled down.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's what my Schmidt Casper looks like before it cools off.
Yeah, so,
We're out of hourglass.
so what we're talking about is when your telescope is warm, it comes out of the house or comes out of the garage or something, and the mirror is warmer than the air around it, then you get this wiggly layer of air right down by the mirror, and you accentuate this bad seeing situation. So the way you get around that is to let your telescope cool off in the night air and reach the same temperature as the surrounding night air, and your images will get more sharp. So you'll hear us talk about, I need to let my telescope cool down. That's what we mean. If you look, you put your telescope up and you look at it and you see, dang it,
I see David.
and you see that nastiness, you need to let your telescope cool. And you need to make sure you're not looking over heat emitters, like the neighbor's roof, or your black pavement driveway, or, you know, things that will hold heat and then release it into the night air. Well, you can do those tricks.
Or Paul was cooking a pizza in his RV. Sorry.
This is bad. Anyway, the address for this Pickering Scale webpage is going to be at the end. And I, just out of curiosity, go visit it. It's amazing. Because you'll see things that you've seen in your own telescope. So anyway, there's that. And here's my table that correlates the different measurements. Mike has already shown you one, a nice graphic representation. So there's your seeing scales. Now to the transparency.
Yeah, so this is one that I think really confuses a lot of people. Transparency. It really is how opaque the atmosphere is, or how clear it is. And I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't wrap my head around it until I started thinking about a fishbowl. So you've got really poor transparency because there's lots of stuff in the water. The water is completely still. Nothing's shaking, nothing's moving. It's completely still. But there's junk in it. Versus a crystal clear, perfect fishbowl. So factors that can actually influence that transparency. Moisture and water vapor, also known as, got a lot of them tonight, clouds. Humidity, smoke. Go out to Jordan Lake and especially on a big holiday weekend, you can smell it in the air. I love volcanic ash. I remember when we had the, some of those volcanoes in
Indonesia and just
Indonesia, but there was some in Europe. I can't remember. There were Iceland. Yeah, it was affecting air travel. But yeah, our lovely friend pollen, and yes, and even light pollution, but pollution as well. So you can have lots of aerosols, you name it. So it's not just light pollution, but it's any sort of particulates that are in the air. So all those can drastically impact transparency.
again, these links will show up at the end of the show. I've been known to look at the air quality information that the government puts out, and they measure particulates in two sizes, and they measure the ozone. I'm not thinking the ozone has a thing to do with transparency, but the particulate measurements do. They measure particulate that's 1 micron in size, and they measure particulates 2.5 microns in size. And that's the one I think that affects us the most. So you can go to this web address and you can look at a map of the southeastern US, and you can see how much particulate is over your observing spot in the middle of North Carolina. and you can see there's a lot of goo or there's not so much goo. Now, I don't know how many people rely on this. I look at it. It is a thing you can look at, and you certainly find out about polygons. The other thing you can look at, there was an article in Sky and Telescope several years ago where someone had calculated how the aerosol optical depth, which is this, dang it.
That's what Windy.com has. Windy.com has an aerosol layer.
Well, the guy wrote the article, he did the computations, and he told about where you get the data. Well, the data is taken by satellites. There are some satellites that we have. And they measure how much light can pass all the way through the atmosphere to the ground. So you and I are looking from the ground up. And theoretically, it should be about the same as what the satellite measures from the top down. So what we don't have is a way to check both ends. In other words, we can have a satellite looking down and measuring, and it would be good to be able to measure from the ground up. And then we have a very complete picture of what the air is looking like. There are measurements that record darkness data this way, both from above and from below, but we don't have that for aerosols and particulates. So you can look at the map, you can go to this URL, and you can look at the map, and you can see large, it's done in colors, so you can see large pieces of real estate. It's not like you're gonna see your driveway at Raleigh. You're gonna see North Carolina, or Eastern North Carolina or something. And you can tell how much aerosol is in the air. You can see a historical thing, and it's only historical, because it's the data that has been reported. So you can't forecast what the aerosols are gonna be, but you can look at the history of the last few days, and you can tell that if the aerosols have been really low, they're probably gonna still be low tonight. And you can record what the aerosol has been in your observing notes, and you can correlate this with your own observations. And then, of course, there's the spitball metric. And for example, I've heard people go out and say, well, I'm looking at M51, the Whirlpool Galaxy, and I can't see the spiral arms very well, so I know it's not going to be a very clear night. Or let's say it's a night where you can see the spiral structure very nicely. You know it's going to be a very transparent night. So you can have those kind of judgments that you'll learn. Yes?
I'm going to say something about this, and I know some people who've been around me for the past 2 years have heard me say this over and over, but for those who've never heard about it, the spitball method, which was talking about M51, yes, I see that.
Just talk louder.
Okay, yeah. The M51 Whirlpool, does everybody know what the Whirlpool Galaxy is? Okay, well, if you don't know what it is, just basically picture a whirlpool, okay? It has spiral arms going around it, but basically, so, God, I hate you, I swear. So, you got a picture? Okay, good. So, what I was going to say is that she's talking about that method with Whirlpool. One of the most extraordinary things I ever saw with the night of good transparency. Most people know that if you have a big telescope, the bigger your telescope, the easier it is to see the different objects. So, bigger your telescope, the easier it is to see. However, that night, all it brought out was a 90 millimeter refractor, and it was like this big. This is how big around this thing is. And granted, we were in a dark, some kind of dark place, big woods. I turned it to M51. It was so transparent, I could see the arms in a refractor this big around. I mean, it was extraordinary. So, yeah, what she's saying is right. I mean, you'd be surprised what good transparency can give you with just such modest equipment.
You've been out of big woods, you could probably describe it better than me. But that moment at night, when all of a sudden on cold winter nights, you look up and it's like you're looking at a sky full of diamonds.
Yeah.
It is eerie what can happen out there. There will be this moment where things change and you'll look up and the contrast has gone up. And the stars are hard, they look like hard diamonds. They're bright white, solid pinpricks. And it's, I mean, maybe the first couple of times I went out there, I didn't notice it. Now, it's on a cold night.
Yeah, it's
when
like
this
24
usually
degrees.
happens. It's cold, but I mean, that's what you have to deal with to get
To
good
get very
skies.
clear.
I was out there, yeah, I mean, my tripod froze to the ground. I got the best photographs of the Horsehead Nebula I had gotten in 5 years of photography that night, but it went down to 17 degrees. But I'm telling you, I looked up and it took my breath away. I'd never seen the sky like that before. It was solid black and the stars were like ice. It was
But
beautiful.
those nights are rare,
Very,
Yeah.
very.
which leads us to our next slide.
And cold,
What
cold
else goes
doesn't
on that
necessarily.
Learn how to park your
mean-
car so your exhaust doesn't mess with the heater, so when you get in there, warm up.
Just as a counterpoint to those two great stories, I never fully understood transparency until Mike, Martin, and I were trying to do a Messier Marathon in the height of pollen season in the March last year at Big Woods. And the transparency was so, I mean, Mike and I were cheapies and go-to. We knew we were on this stuff and you still couldn't see it.
Yeah.
And so that really drove home how, not only how good transparency, but how bad it can be. That you literally can't see anything.
You can't see through it.
Yeah, when your Newtonian has a green mirror at the end of the night, you know you have that transparency.
There's a,
Come on,
So obviously there's a lot of variables here, so this is a wide open question, but are there areas, either within the state or within the region, or even just in the continent of the US, that are accessible for ordinary human beings, where some of these variables are more optimal for certain parts of the year? Within reason.
Yeah, I mean, East Coast wise,
Florida Keys for seeing.
Florida Keys for
You
seeing.
would say that the winter time is probably
Yeah.
a little better than the summertime
For
for
transparency.
transparency, but it's worse for seeing because seeing seems to be tied to heat and these turbulence that occurs from, and if you've got a lot of raging like jet stream over your head, you're gonna have really bad transparency.
And
High pressure systems, when you get in the core of a high pressure, you're gonna have good seeing.
You're not gonna see the, so the black core in the middle of winter here.
No.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to get real deep high pressure systems that come, that's when our coldest nights are. So when you get into the core of the high pressure, it's gonna be your coldest night and it's gonna be your best seeing. And usually your best transparency too, because our winter weather is very low in humidity, which goes a long way to getting rid of your transparency.
Now, I will say that as predominantly a visual person, although I do the electronic EA side, I would never allow poor transparency or poor seeing to stop me from going out on a non-cloudy night, just because, again, it's
Nah,
just
dude,
both times are still
I've
coming
gone
down.
out before and it was a waste of time.
But
If you're photographing,
No, I mean, doing observing, I mean, you couldn't do anything.
yeah.
It was just so, the transparency was so bad, you couldn't do it.
A lot of, to answer your question, a lot of it stems to how far are you willing to drive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some sites that, like when we go to Stone River, up in, the north end of, Falls Lake, Car Reservoir, but I mean, if you go to Cherry Springs, Pennsylvania, that's a very popular dark sky site. I've been up there. The problem is, you're up in the mountains, and you drive 3 days to get there. You've got 7 days at the star party, and you're lucky if you have 2 nights that are clear. You know, so, but if you're lucky and get 4 or 5 nights, it's worth the trip. And it's significantly darker than I've seen at Stone River.
And as bright as Big Woods is, it's still gonna be a lot better than your backyard.
Yeah.
true.
I mean, the bottom line, it's 2 hours. It's a 2-hour drive to get to significantly darker skies from where we're sitting right now.
True.
2 hours, 3 hours to get to the mountains.
Yeah.
Right,
That's exactly.
right.
That's exactly.
You're kind of looking at, I'm kind of looking at the situation the other way, where you assess the conditions and figure out what it's best to look at tonight. So if it's a very steady night, well, you might take an opportunity to look at the moon or planets or something. If it's a nice dark location with decent transparency, maybe you can look at the faint fuzzy deep sky objects. And it's those few nights that are really good at both. You need to take an opportunity and have the extremely good night list of things that are really hard to see, maybe things you've tried before and didn't get to see. So it's adapting yourself and your observing plans to whatever the sky is going to permit you to see. But I agree with Doug. It's not that you should not go out because your seeing isn't perfect, but if the seeing is perfect, well, this is an opportunity to split that double star I've never been able to split, for example. Yes?
On that top, that set us right under how to plan your observing based on conditions, where it says you can observe planets, moons, and stars from a light polluted site if the seeing is pretty good. Another way you can tell that is go outside in the daytime and see how much haze is in the air. If there's little or no haze, then there's nothing for the light to reflect off of it. Most important, look how blue the sky is in the daytime. The bluer it is, you can take some trees to show some light. You may still see pretty good.
True. True. All right, Mike.
Let me echo one thing on that other slide, but definitely have a bucket list of those objects. Maybe sorted by season or whatever, but when you know all of a sudden you've got great conditions and they just kind of pop up, have that list ready to go. So these are all online resources really about getting the forecast of conditions. My favorite is CalSky. I've found that to be the most accurate over time, and that's this little box over here, where along this top line it will give you the transparency. The darker that line is, the more transparent it is. The lighter that line is, in fact right here it's all white, that means it's not very good. You've got kind of in this little section here, in this top area, this kind of inverted pyramids, that is the amount of forecasted cloud cover. You've got the amount of forecasted rain down here. You've got your temperature, and this is all in metric units, but you have your temperature in the red line, and then you have your wind and also some directions in the green line. But I found that this is, for the most part, really accurate, and you can actually go out 10 days on this one. Obviously, your forecast out to 10 days is quite variable, but it does go out 4 days. And Phyllis, I think you pointed me to this one, Astrospheric.
Yeah.
That is a lot like the old standby clear sky chart, but I think it has more information. So you've got your cloud cover, you've got your transparency, and then you've got your seeing. The darker the blue, the better. And then when you highlight in one particular area, it will give you all the information about that time zone or that time period you've selected. It usually has about 24 hours listed up top, but then there's a bottom section that you can actually go to and see up to 4 or 5 days.
Astrospheric also has a phone app.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And so does Clear Outside, as well as Clear Sky Chart. But Clear Outside, it's pretty much more, I don't have a picture of it here, it's pretty much more just forecasting clouds, humidity, and some other things. It does not attempt to do transparency or seeing. You've got this pretty much the standby, or what I first saw when I started with astronomy, is Clear Sky Chart. This one's for Jordan Lake. Again, it will give you your cloud cover, your transparency, seeing, darkness. I cut it off on this one, but you can also see the humidity, I think, dew point, and kind of other things as well. And then last but not least is Skippy Sky. This one is for the southeast, but it has a different map for each of the conditions. This one right here is for the seeing index. The darker the color, the better it is. So in this scenario, we were looking at Wednesday evening. We had really, really great seeing forecasted for the night. So it gives you a high-level view. It's definitely not as site-specific as these other ones, but this one kind of gives you a sense of what's the overall region doing. So if you know you've got, and you're allowed to advance over time, you can actually put it into a series of moving graphs, or you can just manually move it. But it gives you a timestamp, so you can see if poor conditions are coming. So it is somewhat helpful from that standpoint. But these are all pretty good. I really think it's funny how each of them has a different country flair. You've got Skippy Sky from the Australians. You've got Cal Sky from the Germans. You've got Clear Sky Chart is Canadian. Clear Outside is British. I'm not 100% sure about Astrospheric. That might be US.
So there's another app that you guys may or may not have heard of, for those of you with ADD and like instant gratification. It's called Good to Stargaze, and it's a little app that gives you this nice little panel, and it tells you right at the top whether or not it's good or bad. And you can set parameters in here for your personal preferences. If you only want it to say it's good, if it's, seeing is 3 arc seconds or better, you can set some of these values. And it has a forecast in the free version up to 24 hours down the road, and it'll put red blocks in the forecast to show you, it's real small, obviously. But yeah, it's kind of a neat app, and it's right there. It's just like a little quick, if you're on the road somewhere and say, hey, it's good to look, come go.
So we'll leave this up for maybe over the break if someone wants to take a picture of the QR code. But if anyone has any questions.
That will take you to a list of all the resources we've been discussing. It's in a PDF document on my Google Drive, but if you do that QR code, you'll go right to it.
I'm going to install some nifty apps on your phone.
You get put on Nightware's mailing list.
You like that?
Yeah.
That's
All right. Thank you.